अरे भैंस के यहाँ पूरा गेम खत्म करना है आज मैंने एपिसोड 1 2 भी भाई। डेवलपर कमेंट्री बस। ये सब पहले ब्लैक स्क्रीन आ गई मेरे स्क्रीन पे आई नहीं ब्लैक बाद में थी। कहाँ तक पहुँचा था। हाँ यहाँ तक पहुँचा था। एनेबल हुई भी ना डेवलपर क्या था ये। क्या फंसा हुआ है इसमें। आ गया ये।
Buggy sound engine. The audio for the buggy was challenging because we wanted it to feel like a really powerful vehicle that's driving along at super high speed, even though the maps aren't really big enough to support that. And the buggy doesn't really leave first gear, and it has a top speed of maybe 35 miles an hour. Now, in our defense, 35 miles an hour is still pretty fast, especially back in 2004. In addition to the speed, the driving inputs are really simple. So with a keyboard as your target input device, the player's controls are basically binary. So the buggy's either accelerating or not accelerating, it's turning fully in one direction or not. So essentially, we need to create all this audio complexity to represent a simulation where the complexity doesn't actually exist. So we build a fake engine for the buggy's audio. It's got its own transmission, and we combine the player's inputs with data from the physics simulation. We measure the torque on each simulated wheel, whether it's spinning or making contact, and we create a set of looping sounds and then carefully blend between them as the fake engine shifts gears in response to the wheel data. And we just basically kept trying different things. We added more complexity. We did some fine-tuning until the buggy just feels more fun and sort of rewards you for that feeling of going fast. And most players, they don't really comment on it other than saying the buggy sounds good, and to us that's the success, given the amount of craziness that was going on under the hood.
Thumpers. Whenever possible, there's a lot of value in players feeling like they figured something out on their own. It makes the world feel more alive, rather than just a series of gameplay elements lined up for the player. If we can accept the risk that some percentage of players might miss an element entirely, we can take a more subtle approach. We took this approach with Thumpers, designing setups that players are likely to encounter but aren't forced to engage with. There are plenty of visual and audio cues, as well as inline reactions, to help the player understand what's happening. It doesn't guarantee all players will figure it out, but playtesting showed that most will.
Antlions. With the player driving the buggy throughout the coast, we needed a pervasive enemy that could justifiably appear anywhere and act as a constant threat to keep the player in or near their buggy. Antlions spawning from the sand were the perfect solution. Their high mobility allowed them to keep up with the buggy for short bursts, unlike our humanoid enemies. Plus, they were very satisfying to run over.
Coast. We wanted a wide open section of the game for the buggy, but we still needed a way to constrain the player's movement. Choosing a coastline gave us a natural boundary along one side of the map while still feeling open and expansive. It also helped visualize the effects of the Combine's extraction of Earth's resources. Playtesters still tried to swim out to sea, so we added leeches to deter them. The leeches couldn't be a real avoidable enemy that players felt they could fight, so they're a bit magical. Players generally understood that they were pushing the game's boundaries, so we didn't overdevelop them.
Grenade House. A lot of a Half-Life game is about giving players slightly novel combat experiences around each corner, even if they're just small tweaks on previous ones. They don't all have to be skill-based challenges. Sometimes they can just be fun moments where the player gets to enjoy themselves. This grenade house is one of those moments, with the twist being that we've inverted the usual setup. Instead of letting the player drop grenades on enemies below, we've put the enemies above. The unlimited grenade box is a somewhat clumsy way to encourage players to engage with the scenario, but its invulnerability also ensures the players can still climb up to the floor above, even if they've blown up everything else.
Guys, यहाँ और उठाओ। ये गलीज लगते नहीं वाले, उल्टी आती देख के ऐसे वाले zombies को। शैडो क्यों दिख रहा है उसके? क्या? कभी कार अजीब इंटरेक्शन ऑब्जेक्ट है लाना होता है ऐसे
Antlion design. In some of the earliest design work for the game, we had plans for multiple core alien races, with the Combine being just one of them. One of the other races was a religious insectoid species, and antlions were part of that. Later, as we developed Coast, we started viewing them more as pests that came through the Zen portals, along with headcrabs and other creatures. While they aren't actually from Zen, they infest the corners of any world they enter, a lot like cockroaches.
Buggy sound design. The sound design for the buggy was based on samples from an old 1968 Camaro. And we chose that car because they have these amazing V8 engines with just huge pistons. And there's not really another sound like it. It has this sort of gutsy, visceral sound that we were looking for. The transmission also has this really wonderful mechanical whine when it stops accelerating. And that combination felt really responsive within this basically binary input system that we had to work with. So the fake engine transmission wasn't modeled after a real-world car. Instead, it was just designed as a simple system to reward the player for holding down the accelerator. So it's like a looping escalator that produces a rising tone, constantly building tension and shifting gears whenever the tone needs to restart. And since the player would quickly run out of space in our relatively small maps, the goal was just to make accelerating fun for a short period of time.
Buggy birds. In one memorable Coast playtest, a player returned to their vehicle after exploring a house and happened to see a bird flying past. They yelled at the bird, telling it to stay away from their buggy, complaining that birds often foul up their cars in real life. In our post-playtest discussion, we realized that this was the first time we'd had objects separate from the player that the player actually cared about. We saw it as an opportunity to explore, so we built a system to deliver the moment that playtesters feared. When the player leaves their buggy alone for a while and is out of sight, we spawn a seagull at a random location on the vehicle frame. As time goes on, the seagull spawns poop decals on the car body beneath it and continues until the player returns, at which point it flies away. Naturally, playtesters wanted to be able to clean their vehicle, so we added the ability to wash the car by driving it into shallow water. It was late enough in development that we already had the tech for all of this, so the feature was quick to implement. It's one of those cases where we know only a small percentage of players will discover it. But if we can implement these kind of details efficiently and have enough of them, most players will encounter at least one.
Open world loot. The openness of Coast introduced a new problem for us in how we distributed item rewards. In a Half-Life game, we typically reward players for exploring. If you see the way forward but notice something off to the side, there's probably something useful if you take the time to search. When we first started playtesting our Coast maps, we tucked rewards away in the corners of the outdoor areas. However, this led to a worse experience with the buggy. The wide open spaces meant there were always lots of small areas that looked like they might contain something, and players kept stopping and getting out of the buggy to search. It became tedious and interrupted the fun of the level. So, we removed those scattered rewards. But this raised a new problem. How do we tell the player when it's worth getting out of the buggy? After some thought, we established a rule. Any kind of human construction would always come with gameplay content and exploration rewards, while purely natural areas would be left empty. We couldn't tell players this directly, but it aligned well with their natural assumptions, and we reinforced it consistently with areas like this.
Boathouse. In Half-Life 1, we discovered we could get a lot of value from scenarios where different AI enemies fight each other. It's fun for players to watch them engage, and it's much easier to observe enemy behavior when you're not the one that's being threatened. This first encounter between antlions and Combine soldiers is designed to be a fun opportunity to ram something with the buggy, but it also serves to highlight the thumper. By seeing the soldiers use the thumper to hold off antlions, we hope more players would come to understand its purpose. We liked how the soldiers demonstrated the value of staying near the thumper while engaging with the antlions.
This is no time to be wandering around. The Combine's closing in.
गॉर्डन फ्रीमैन को बताएगा ये क्या करना है. हाँ यहाँ पे बहुत फाइट आती है. बेसमेंट में जाना होता है.
Gordon Freeman! This steerable rocket launcher is our best bet for taking down a gunship. Hello. I'll be right with you. Now.
Flying vehicle audio. The large flying enemies in the game present a unique audio challenge. During combat, they're much more mobile than other enemies, and they often move a significant distance away from the player. They're also really dangerous if they have line of sight. So these factors led us to focus on an audio solution specifically around occlusion. In other words, when you can see the enemy and when the enemy can see you. And we wanted to make a clear audio distinction between when they have that line of sight. So the flying vehicle engine sounds are made up of multiple looping sounds that we play simultaneously. And some of those loops are processed by the DSP system based on the space you're in, while others are played directly and unprocessed. So the DSP system adds more of an environment echoing effect when we run sound through that system. So when the flying object is occluded behind something, it can't see you, we increase the percentage of loops that go through the DSP processing, and it sounds like that object is a little more distant. And then when that enemy emerges from behind an object and it can see you, we play more of the direct sound. So that overall just gives you a sense that the sound is either distant and directionless or more directly in your line of sight. And, You can sort of hear it when a helicopter emerges from behind a building. Ideally, you can really hear that difference.
Combine gunship. The gunship was an interesting problem. We had a helicopter flight model already and didn't really have time to build something completely new. So we tuned the helicopter's flight model until it felt different enough, and then derived the gunship's organic animation state from the values coming out of that simulation. We also tried to keep it as truthful as possible. For example, there's a limit as how much it can turn its head to aim its cannon, and if it needs to aim beyond that, it has to alter its flight path to bring the cannon around to bear. It's not allowed to just cheat. The other key feature was its engine sound. We have sound spatialization, so the player can tell roughly where it is, but the gunship is a fast-moving object and it's up in the air, away from any nearby reference points. As a result, it can be hard to tell exactly how far away it is and how fast it's moving. To fix that, we added a Doppler effect to the engine sound, pitch shifting it based on the gunship's velocity relative to you. It's a subtle effect, but it's extremely effective at subconsciously helping you perceive the gunship's location and direction, critical information letting you know that you're being hunted by it.
For an attack.
Odessa Cubbage. Odessa Cubbage is an example of the kind of cameo character we found works well. He's an entertaining guy with some entertaining details, living inside his own little bubble. Since he doesn't leave his scenario, he's free to be exaggerated enough to stand out. We started with his model, which was repurposed from a cut section of the game, and named him after the title of a spam email we received. The model was originally a Norwegian fisherman, and it didn't quite fit as an Englishman, so we slapped a mustache on him, and in that moment, Odessa's character was born. He's ultimately a charlatan, with everything about him being fake. His accent, his mustache, everything. He would never put himself in danger, making him the perfect person to hand Gordon the RPG and explain exactly how to use it.
Laser-guided RPG. The laser guidance feature of the RPG was a huge headache for us because it was difficult to teach. Many playtesters would fire the RPG and then immediately duck behind cover, which meant they didn't see the rocket's flight path. Even worse, they didn't realize the rocket was now turning around to fly back at them. We tried various HUD elements and laser dot indicators to help, but found that most players overlooked them, focusing on the enemy instead. We made as many small improvements as we could, like emphasizing the feature in Odessa's speech and enhancing the audio and visuals around how the gunship shoots down direct RPG shots. While these changes helped some players grasp the feature, we never reached a point where we felt confident that almost everyone understood it. We even considered cutting the feature entirely, but gunship combat without it was much less interesting. The laser guidance forced the player to keep the gunship in sight while the rocket was in flight, but that also meant the gunship had line of sight back, creating a tension we loved.
I gather you've disposed of that gunship, Dr. Freeman. Your reputation, sir, is well deserved. I shall have someone open the gate for you immediately so that you can drive on. I understand that Dr. Vance is in great need. Use extreme caution when approaching the bridge. Radio silence from that outpost leads me to believe it is part of Combine control. Still, you're clearly the right man for the job. You'll make it through if anyone can. Farewell. And please tell Dr. Vance that Colonel Cubbage regrets not having been able to rescue him in person.
The Freeman must now hurry on. The Eli Vance is held in distress most dire. Their reason for...
स्पेस ही कर दो.
Drive safely.
D2 Coast 04. This map was actually the first area of coast that we built, before the crane and other elements existed. The drained seabed and rusted ships were some of the earliest pieces of art direction we developed. Years later, we showcased the map in our 2003 E3 demonstration, though much of the gameplay was still being figured out at the time. As a result, when we began building out the entire coast section, that demonstration became a useful vision for us to work toward.
Audio over distance. The large-scale spaces in the coast maps led us to seek an audio solution for how sound changes over distance. So for instance, in these maps, an enemy can be well over 100 yards away, and their gun should sound different at that range than when it's up close. We decided to store our sounds in a single stereo file with the near sound in the left channel and the far sound in the right channel. And then during playback, we crossfade, or we change the proportion of sound you hear between those two channels based on the player's distance from the sound. And it was a simple solution that worked well. It helped us with memory constraints. You can easily hear it in action. Just listen to how a Combine soldier's gunshots change as you drive towards them.
We wanted the buggy to be more than just a means of travel, so we decided to attach a gun to it. We chose the Tower Cannon, a Half-Life 1 weapon we liked but hadn't found a place for it in Half-Life 2. The Tower Cannon can shoot through walls, which makes it tricky for level design, so we limited it to the coast section. Once you introduce wall-penetrating weapons, level design becomes much tougher. Furthermore, we mounted an ammunition crate on the back of the buggy, giving the player unlimited SMG ammo throughout coast. This was especially helpful for playtesters who struggled with the infinite antlions spawning from the sand.
Crane. The crane took a lot of fine-tuning to get right. Something that needed to generate so much physical force was always risky, given the limitations of our rigid body physics and destruction technology. For example, the magnet was never going to fully meet player expectations for something with that much mass. But because the crane was stationary, we could carefully choose everything within its range and fine-tune as needed. Fortunately, most players didn't seem to notice its rougher edges, likely because of the sheer novelty of interacting with something like it in a vaguely realistic physics environment.
Medical systems engaged. Morphine administered. Minor alterations detected.
Ramming with the buggy. Our physics system is based on rigid bodies, which means it doesn't support any deformation or destruction of objects. If a physical object is hit by something, it can move if allowed, but otherwise nothing happens. So, when you drive the buggy through a glass window, we have to employ some trickery to make things work as expected. Because the window is fixed in place, the physics simulation will actually bounce the buggy off the window. But it does notify our game system that a collision occurred. The game system handles destruction, so it breaks the window into glass shards and tells the physics system to start simulating them. Crucially, the game system also tells the physics system to restore the buggy's state to where it was before the collision. This ensures that the next time physics is simulating, the buggy will drive freely through the now destroyed window. This process does produce a one-frame hitch in the buggy's physics, as it briefly stops and is teleported back to the instant before the impact. We're sorry if knowing this has made Half-Life 2 totally unplayable, but after watching playtests at the time, we decided we actually liked the momentary hitch. It added to the sense of impact.
नीचे जाकर उसको आगे करना पड़ेगा। sorry dog. हाँ आई एम फाइन. ये असल में डेवलपर कमेंट्री है.
Opportunistic moments. Some memorable moments in the game come from the interactions of multiple game systems, but sometimes we realize these moments are likely to happen only rarely. When that's the case, we often wish more players would experience them. There's a tension here. The more we know players will encounter something, the more effort we can put into it. But if it feels too artificial, the moment can come across as forced, and players may not respond as positively. The gunship cinematic death. Opportunistic moments. Some memorable moments in the game come from the interactions of multiple game systems, but sometimes we realize these moments are likely to happen only rarely. When that's the case, we often wish more players would experience them. There's a tension here. The more we know players will encounter something, the more effort we can put into it. But if it feels too artificial, the moment can come across as forced, and players may not respond as positively. The gunship cinematic death is an example where we nudge things a bit, trying to increase the chances of a memorable moment.
हाँ commentary में मुझे damage नहीं होता.
The design of this area and the gunship's flight path make it likely that the player and the gunship are in the right spots when it dies. If they are, we trigger the gunship's crash into the cars. If not, it dies in the usual way. It's totally gamey, but playtesters didn't seem to mind when the moment played out well.
Bye bye. Yes, Half-Life 2 is accurate. Even though it came out in 2004 something.
Roller mines. Roller mines were created to fill the need for an enemy that could threaten players while driving the buggy. Since the player in the buggy was essentially a fully physically simulated entity, we thought it would be interesting to also have a physically simulated enemy. The Manhack had already shown us how this approach could lead to an enemy with lots of interesting interactions with the world. So we built the roller mine, a ball whose movement is entirely driven by generating torque on itself, and iterated on its behavior until it was fun to drive against. Roller mines aren't particularly dangerous to the buggy, but if you let them stack up, they can become a problem, especially near a cliffside. We also made sure they worked well when the player's on foot, allowing level designers to get a few extra encounters out of them.
Ambush. One of the general challenges of a Half-Life style FPS is that the player is constantly moving forward into spaces they don't know. This means that when they find themselves in combat, they're in unfamiliar areas with no knowledge of how to approach the fight. We use many different methods to help the player with this problem, and this ambush is one example. Upon arrival, the player fights a group of Combine among these houses. During the fight and the exploration afterward, the player has the chance to learn the arena layout. Then, when the player explores up into this attic, we spawn a second wave of Combine. In that second fight, the player now has the advantage of knowing the layout, allowing them to make more tactical decisions in defending against the ambushers.
Yeah, I'm only playing it because of the 20th anniversary. It got the developer commentary update, that's why. The thing is, when you listen to the commentary, you can't take damage. That's how I cheat.
Crossbow. This is the player's first opportunity to get the crossbow in the game, and looking back, it's somewhat surprising we didn't gate it. It's entirely possible for the player to drive right past it. To make that less likely, we set up the roadblock and vantage point to encourage players to get out of the buggy, at which point they'd spot the crossbow and item crate. Playtesting showed that almost every player stopped and collected the weapon, but this is a case where the difference between crossbow. This is the player's first opportunity to get the crossbow in the game, and looking back, it's somewhat surprising we didn't gate it. It's entirely possible for the player to drive right past it. To make that less likely, we set up the roadblock and vantage point to encourage players to get out of the buggy, at which point they'd spot the crossbow and item crate. Playtesting showed that almost every player stopped and collected the weapon, but this is a case where the difference between playtesting and real play might matter.
But for the
playtester who's been playing since the start of Coast may not be as fatigued with exploration as someone who's been playing from the very beginning of the game. So, we placed another crossbow a few levels ahead, directly on the player's path in Nova Park.
Gas station. We had grand plans for this encounter. We envisioned building a gas station that the player would fight around, likely igniting the gas tanks and setting fire to everything.
Half-Life 1.
We imagined the
Half-Life
player
2,
driving away
and
from a raging
Black
fire.
Mesa.
But budget and performance were harsh constraints in 2003, and the station had to keep getting smaller and simpler to fit into Coast's
Black Mesa
large
is just a
levels.
remake.
Our plans for a dynamic fire
Community.
system didn't materialize,
Still
and building it no longer made sense. There's always a limit to how much work we can justify for a single encounter. In the end, the only remnants of our original vision are the explosive gas tanks.
I don't know anything about instructors here. Waiting for this. Yeah, it's this one. I think it's 2 games in 1. Yeah, it's both Upward Wars and Blue Ship. And it hasn't got a release date since 2 years. I don't know what's happened. But yeah. There's a combine.
Area portals. One performance challenge we faced in Coast was handling wide open spaces that included buildings with highly detailed interiors, or at least they were detailed by 2003 standards. When the player was outside, we wanted to allocate as much of our budget as possible to rendering that space, without losing resources to the building interiors. But unless we were willing to board up every window and door, the player could still see inside. To solve this, we created a feature called area portals, placing one in every open window and door. An area portal precomputes a flat image of the building's interior, and during play, when the player is some distance away, the area portal displays this precomputed image over the window or door, allowing us to skip rendering the actual interior. As the player approaches, we smoothly crossfade between the area portal's image and the building's actual contents. With careful use, area portals helped us to meet our performance goals on Coast, along with the occasional door that closed itself behind you.
Occlusion. In Half-Life 1 and much of Half-Life 2, the world consisted mainly of enclosed tunnels and corridors, which worked well with a binary space partition, or BSP tree. Essentially, this tech allowed us to quickly sort through the geometry and determine what might be visible in the player's view. But the open areas in Coast and other outdoor sections didn't suit that approach, so we needed some new tech. Area portals were one, allowing us to carve out the world into discrete chunks separated by portals. Doors and windows, that is, not aperture science ones. We also developed an additional occlusion system, which basically said that if the player can't see through, over, or around a large object, don't render what's on the other side. This might seem an obvious thing not to do, but it takes some work to make sure that calculating what's on the other side of the big thing isn't slower than just rendering everything. So to make that calculation fast, level designers placed large occlusion volumes inside major terrain shapes and big occluding objects like buildings, and during rendering, we could then test the bounds of entities against these volumes to avoid rendering anything the player couldn't see. Detail objects. Once we had outdoor sections running, it was clear they needed some form of high-frequency detail. So we added small foliage elements, like grass and shrubs, across the displacement terrain. But we knew we couldn't afford, which is to say we didn't have the time, to hand place them all. So we built the detail object system, which generates small foliage elements automatically based on the displacement material. Each material specifies the type of foliage to place, along with a set of parameters. At map compile time, the system calculates random points on the surface and selects foliage to place there. Given performance constraints, there was still a fairly complex hand-authoring process for foliage texture sheets, allowing us to render all of them in a single pass.
What?
Terrain and performance. Our performance budget was often a significant constraint when it came to combat, and even more so for combat on terrain surfaces. When NPCs move, they perform many small spatial probes to determine if they can safely navigate their chosen path. To help visualize it, imagine they can't see and are constantly waving a stick in front of themselves to check if the way is clear. The performance cost of these probes increases with the complexity of the world geometry. Our terrain displacement system creates uneven surfaces using many polygons, far more than the perfectly flat floors found elsewhere. This meant that NPCs moving on coast terrain were more resource-intensive than in other areas, and that constraint dictated the scale of many encounters in this section of the game.
What scene is that where we gather all the ant line? Is that in the episode or in this FF2? I don't remember. Can I jump? I think one enemy on here. What's that?
The bridge. This bridge section was inspired by the Deception Pass Bridge, just up the road from Valve's office. We initially built this section as a pure navigation puzzle, gradually layering more gameplay into it. It also became the primary test case for our players' edge friction. In our movement system, we subtly increase friction on the player's deceleration as they approach the edge of a surface. Players have never noticed it, likely because it aligns naturally with their goal of stopping at the edge to look down, matching human tendency to move more slowly and carefully near a drop. But it's a critical feature for this part of the game. We know this because at one point during development, we accidentally broke it, and suddenly all of our playtesters started repeatedly falling to their deaths.
Bridge playtesting. The bridge section was always a high point in playtests, with testers consistently having strong reactions to it. The tension they felt while slowly making their way over the girders was visible in their movements. Over time, we layered more challenges into the traversal, and playtests only became more entertaining to watch. From the train rumbling across the bridge and shaking the player, to a surprise head crab in a shack that seemed like a safe haven midway through, we did feel a little guilty relishing the playtesters' visible stress, but we weren't total monsters. After players made it across the bridge, they'd breathe a sigh of relief, disable the Combine shield, and then realize they had to return across the underside. Concerned they might be bored on the second trip, we decided to add a gunship to keep them company out on the girders.
Bridge gunship. We were particularly happy with the gunship fight, despite it being tricky to set up given the level geometry. Being on the underside of the bridge allowed the gunship to move fully around the player, using all 3 dimensions to position itself above and below at different moments. The girders provide plenty of high-frequency cover, creating opportunities for the gunship's fire to produce a fun and dynamic visual and audio display.
bulletproof. IEW. Where do I get more rockets? Rocket. Of a barrel. Get the enemies. Yeah. I saw that. But does it work with this thing? Where do I get rockets? I don't understand those things. That's the only place I remember where buckets. Oh, I'm dead. Okay. Bro, I'm supposed to. How did a zombie kill him?
Blood loss detected. Warning. Vital signs critical. Emergency. User
Let's
death
save it this point.
imminent.
I don't think I can go there. Brother.
"28 transitions later. After stringing together a few levels with dark tunnels as transition spaces, we realized we could subvert player expectations by building another one that appeared to be a transition, but instead contained something else. Like everyone else, we saw 28 Days Later in 2002, loved it, and immediately wanted to create an escalating zombie encounter in one of our dark tunnels. It came together quickly, and we were pleased with the result. Years later, we met Alex Garland, the writer of the film. He had played and enjoyed Half-Life 2, and we confessed that his movie inspired this section.
Ramming zombies with the buggy. As human beings, we have expectations for our physical world, as mentioned a few times in this commentary. One of those expectations is, if you hit a zombie with your car, it should get absolutely booted into the air. But getting this effect in-game isn't as straightforward as it is in the real world. For performance reasons, enemies like the zombie use a simplified collision box during gameplay. This is a box that fits snugly around the zombie with no part of the model sticking out. But when the zombie dies, it's converted into a ragdoll with more accurate per limb collision
mind
boxes,
of our generation.
though this is more expensive to simulate. This change in collision representation adds further complexity when you ram a zombie with the buggy, beyond just the frame hitch. When the buggy first collides with the zombie, it touches the zombie's simplified collision box. The game then kills the zombie, converting it into a ragdoll that the physics system begins to simulate. Now, with more accurate per-limb collision, the closest part of the zombie may be several inches away from the buggy. As a result, the next time the physics system simulates, the zombie starts falling from gravity because the buggy is no longer pushing it. While it's only a short moment before the buggy reaches the zombie again, this small discrepancy made ramming zombies unsatisfying. They often fell out of the player's view. To fix this, we saved the force the zombie's collision box received when hit by the buggy, and applied that same force to the ragdoll after conversion. We also added a slight upward force to the ragdoll, launching it a bit. With these tweaks, zombies reliably folded over the front of the buggy when hit, which better matched player expectations.
Flashlight power. The decision to have both Sprint and the flashlight share the HEV's suit power was a controversial one in Half-Life 2. Initially, only Sprint used suit power, which made sense as it was meant to be only a short burst of speed. The flashlight, on the other hand, could be used indefinitely, but playtesting revealed an issue. Players often left dark areas without realizing the flashlight was still on. In brightly lit open areas like Coast, our performance budget couldn't support the flashlight being on continuously, so we needed a way to turn it off without player involvement. Limiting its power seemed like a simple solution, with the benefit of adding some tension to dark areas too. The challenge then became, what resource should it use? We already had suit power and didn't want to clutter the UI with a new resource just for the flashlight. We toyed with the idea of other player abilities using suit power, thinking it might be interesting to have players make trade-offs between them. This is a good example of game design often being about choosing between imperfect solutions. We didn't love the idea of Sprint and flashlight sharing a resource, but we also didn't want multiple resources cluttering the UI. In Episode 2, with no plans to add anything else that consumed suit power, we ultimately decided to give the flashlight its own separate resource.
Battery finding. With the increased density of objects in Half-Life 2's gameplay spaces, we thought it would be interesting to have players search for a specific item, especially if there was some logic to where it might be found. This way, players could locate the item either through careful observation and deduction, or just by brute force searching the area. Since we already had models for cars and batteries, it was a natural step to create a small junkyard for players to explore. We also hid a couple of extra batteries in unexpected places, for the players who chose the brute force method. As with other item-based puzzles, this one needed a failsafe in case players lost the batteries. You can try throwing all of them over the cliff if you want to see what happens.
Where's the last battery? Where's the last one?
We're picking up radio chatter. They're looking for your car. Get your car in the garage.
Dropship deployment. Deploying soldiers from the dropships was tricky, as it required NPCs to spawn inside another solid object. To get them into the open where they could start navigating normally, they immediately play an animation that has them leaping out of the container the moment they spawn. Once that was working, we encountered another issue. Savvy players would simply just wait outside the container and shoot the soldiers during their exit animation. To counter this, we added a turret to the container to defend the soldiers as they exit. It doesn't fully prevent a player from taking advantage, especially if they're using an indirect weapon like a grenade or something, but that felt realistic and like a true-to-life countermeasure someone thinking strategically might take.
Buggy removal. Once we reached the point where we wanted the player to leave the buggy behind, we had to be very explicit about it. Throughout Coast, players had been leaving the buggy and then returning to it, so we found that playtesters would try to bring it along if it looked even remotely possible. This small garage scene primarily exists to signal clearly that the player is done with driving and will be proceeding on foot.
constraints. For the final coast arena, we envisioned a big finale where the player and a squad of citizens would hold out against waves of combined soldiers, culminating in a gunship battle. Unfortunately, the computational cost of having soldiers and friendly allies moving around on terrain meant that the battle kept being scaled back to fit within our performance budget. By the time we were down to featuring only a single squad of soldiers at any given time, we were already late in development. Too late to make large-scale changes to the arena to accommodate more enemies, we had to redesign the flow of the fight to keep the number of soldiers to a minimum.
Lighthouse Gunship. The gunship scenario here took some work to play out the way we envisioned it. We wanted it to unfold as it would in a movie. In the filmic version, a gunship would fire through the windows as the protagonist ascended the lighthouse, anticipating their movements. To simulate that anticipation in the game, we set up a complex series of trigger volumes along the staircase. As they detect the player moving up, they instruct the gunship to choose a new flight path that matches the player's altitude. The triggers also enable bullseye targets in the windows nearest the player. These are invisible game objects that the enemy AI will immediately perceive as hostile, and prompts the gunship to fire at the windows. This blend of AI and scripting is central to Half-Life's combat scenarios. The AI manages the general adaptive behavior of the NPCs, while the scripting customizes each scenario's unique requirements.
Am I not switching? Right?
Dropship deployment. Deploying
why did I
soldiers from the
spawn
dropships
here?
was tricky, as it required NPCs to spawn inside another solid.
Performance constraints. For the final coast arena, we envisioned a big finale where the player and a squad of citizens would hold out against waves of combined soldiers, culminating in a gunship battle. Unfortunately, the computational cost of having soldiers and friendly allies moving around on terrain meant that the battle kept being scaled back to fit within our performance budget. By the time we were down to featuring only a single squad of soldiers at any given time, we were already late in development. Too late to make large-scale changes to the arena to accommodate more enemies, we had to redesign the flow of the fight to keep the number of soldiers to a minimum.
Buggy removal. Once we reached the point where we wanted the player to leave the buggy behind, we had to be very explicit about it. Throughout Coast, players had been leaving the buggy and then returning to it, so we found that playtesters would try to bring it along if it looked even remotely possible.
Yeah, I
This
think
small garage scene primarily
the
exists to
dialogue,
signal
it
clearly
glitched
that the player is done with driving and will be proceeding on foot.
Lighthouse Gunship. The gunship scenario here took some work to play out the way we envisioned it. We wanted it to unfold as it would in a movie. In the filmic version, a gunship would fire through the windows as the protagonist ascended the lighthouse, anticipating their movements. To simulate that anticipation in the game, We set up a complex series of trigger volumes along the staircase. As they detect the player moving up, they instruct the gunship to choose a new flight path that matches the player's altitude. The triggers also enable bullseye targets in the windows nearest the player. These are invisible game objects that the enemy AI will immediately perceive as hostile, and prompts the gunship to fire at the windows. This blend of AI and scripting is central to Half-Life's combat scenarios. The AI manages the general, adaptive behavior of the NPCs, while the scripting customizes each scenario's unique requirements.
They're running away. Now the fight begins. Where's the door?
It's a gunship! You'll find the rockets for your launcher up in the lighthouse, Freeman! This way, Dr. Freeman. We'll take the cliff path before another gunship finds us.
In Black Mesa, you can actually kill the NPC.
Right along there. And watch your step.
I don't know, it never did that before. This is the first time it went through the building.
Buggy theft. As we built the end of Coast, we decided to have the Combine steal the player's buggy. It really doesn't make logical sense, but after watching so many playtests where players developed a strong attachment to their buggy, we wanted to play with that emotional connection. Once we implemented the theft, we had playtesters yelling at the Combine for stealing their ride, something we took as a sign of success. The soldier firing down from the cliff top is simply there to draw the player's eye up.
Yeah, and he didn't give me a medkit. Oh, we're about to meet Laszlo. The greatest mind of our generation.
You there! Stop where you are! Stay on the rocks! Don't step on the sand! It makes the antlions crazy! Laszlo, don't move! idiot! Walking on the sand brings antlions after you! It's crazy! Laszlo, don't move! No. Help! Dear God! Poor Laszlo! The finest mind of his generation! To come to such an end. We were heading for the Vortigaunt camp, hoping to pick up some bug baits so these damn things would leave us alone. But without Laszlo, what's the point? I know you tried to help. I'll stay with him a while. There's something I have to do. Go ahead. I hope you have better luck than we had.
Yeah, me neither. I just thought you can bring the buggy here. Since
Remember to stay off the
everything's
sand.
so narrow and
The antlions are edgy right now.
Finest mind of his generation. Here is another small interstitial scene that ended up working well. The only requirement for this moment was to teach the player to stay off the sand. The prior scenes, we were still focused on simply making them functional. But by the time we got to this one, we were becoming more comfortable and started enjoying the process of putting extra thought into these moments. In doing so, we pushed the characters beyond being mere signposts, creating something more interesting and entertaining. After release, Laszlo went on to develop a larger-than-life following, reminding us how hard it is to predict what players will hold on to.
yeah, they never would have predicted Skibidi Toilet.
Floor is lava. Building gameplay around broadly understood concepts like the floor is lava made training it easy. We liked how our physics system allowed for a high degree of creative freedom in how players chose to tackle it. Some built walkways out of many objects, while others focused on using just their two favorite sheets of metal. Some carefully followed the path up in the rocks, concerned about falling, while others moved directly towards the exit, perched on objects just above the sand. Playstyles varied. Some players considered it a failure if they summoned antlions, reloading immediately, while others enjoyed scrambling back up on the rocks to recover. We also liked that it functioned as a navigation puzzle, but could be turned into an arena if players preferred. Some just jumped onto the sand and fought their way to the end.
Who the hell wants to fight their way till the end? They're gonna keep spawning. Okay, I just... Okay, how am I gonna get... Okay, I can't go back up. finally. This game. Nope. Okay, I should not have thrown that away. I don't know, even if you walk on an object, it is going to generate some vibration. And then they should detect you. Doesn't make any sense, but gameplay logic. I give up.
Sandtrap Hunter. The explosive barrels are provided for players to use against antlions while standing safely within the Thumper's protection. But we're also using this as a hint for the upcoming antlion guard encounter, where players often use similar tactics to win the fight. Optional player actions, like launching explosives with a gravity gun, can be forgotten if they aren't used regularly. With the wide range of offensive options we give players, there's no guarantee they've used this ability recently. So here, we're subtly suggesting they bring it back into their toolkit before they face the guard.
Vortigaunt Extraction. This arena presented some tricky design
I just gave up at that point.
First, the guard is a melee-only enemy, so we couldn't allow the player to reach areas where the guard couldn't follow. We did experiment with a few range attacks, but didn't like the result. Its goose-spitting attack, for instance, ended up looking ridiculous. The only non-melee attack that survived was its ability to bash physics objects at the player, but this required objects to be in range, which isn't always guaranteed. The second challenge was ensuring that no matter where the guard dies, the Vortigaunt can reach its corpse. This was essential as the game can't proceed if the Vortigaunt is unable to extract the bug bait.
In rare cases, players could find themselves unable to kill the antlion guard in this arena. This would happen if they ran out of ammo, or had misused all of the available physics objects, leaving nothing to launch with the gravity gun. To address this, we added a citizen on the mounted turret above the gate as a failsafe, allowing a stuck player to rely on a citizen to kill the guard.
Whoa! Where did he come from?
The Freemen will do wise to heed our extraction of the Myrmidon's aromatic pheropods. The process is not entirely hygienic, therefore stand aside. The Freemen will have need of these pheropods on the paths ahead. Gather them now. The Freeman must follow.
Man's hustling.
The ant lions won't bother you now, Doc.
The freeman must excuse us. It is rude of us to commune by flux shifting in front of those.
Get going, Dr. Freeman. Nova Prospect is just ahead. One man alone wouldn't stand much chance going in there.
The freeman honors us by his presence. Follow, freeman.
Yes, Freeman pulls them. He has the power of friendship.
Bugbait training. This clumsy bugbait training is where we landed, having run out of time, but needing players to understand the tool for Nova Prospect's design to work. Generally, we aim to add enough flavor and context to training so it doesn't feel like training. It feels like a natural part of discovering something new. Here, though, we didn't quite manage that. As obvious as it may seem, bugbait wasn't something players intuitively grasped. We're well into the game now, so players have plenty of experience dealing with enemies. Before we added any training, the first playtesters who collected bugbait entered the next level and instinctively shot the first antlion they saw, because that had been working up until then. Half-Life tends to encourage a shoot first, ask questions later approach. Similarly, when players reached Nova Prospect, they didn't think to throw bugbait at the Combine soldiers and instead relied on their usual weapons. So, we needed this training not only to show how bugbait works, but also to demonstrate that antlions would be close to the player without attacking.
Now, attend well. Apply pressure to your pheromone to signal the antlions in your command to follow you.
No, not the whole game. I started from... I started from here. Yeah, Highway 17.
Man must squeeze his bugbait sharply if he wishes the antlions to follow where he leads. The freeman must squeeze his bugbait sharply if he wishes the antlions to follow where he leads.
I forgot what I'm supposed to do.
The freeman must squeeze his bugbait sharply if he wishes the antlions to follow where he leads. The freeman must squeeze his bugbait sharply if he wishes the antlions to follow where he leads.
I played this game and even then I don't know what to do. That's just depressing.
Squeeze his bugbait sharply if he wishes the antlions to follow where he leads.
Let's put this up.
The freeman must squeeze his bugbait sharply if he wishes the antlions to follow where he leads.
Bro. I forgot.
The freeman must squeeze his bugbait sharply if he wishes the antlions to follow where he leads. The freeman must squeeze his bugbait sharply if he wishes the antlions to follow where he leads.
Bro, how did I forget what to do here? I'm supposed to blow this up?
The freeman must squeeze his bugbait sharply if he wishes the antlions to follow where he leads. The freeman must squeeze his bugbait sharply if he wishes the antlions to follow where he leads. The freeman must squeeze his bugbait sharply if he wishes the antlions to follow where he leads.
Bugbait sharply.
The Freeman must squeeze his love weight sharply if he wishes the Antlions to follow where he leads.
Oh, there's a secondary attack. Forgot.
And now this one must bid the Freeman farewell. Nova Prospect lies just beyond. Remember well what you have learned here. The Eli Vance has greatest confidence.
No, I forgot there's a secondary attack.
Thumper Final Stage. We liked the final stage of Thumpers, where their purpose is inverted. Now, instead of serving as a tool for safety, they act as a blocker for the player's antlion army. However, we probably should have incorporated more thorough Thumper training before this point. While it was acceptable for players to only partially understand Thumpers in the earlier coast levels, the stakes are higher now because players are also trying out bug bait for the first time. Players who don't realize that this first Thumper prevents their antlines from moving forward may misunderstand how bug bait works. If they throw bug bait at soldiers in the first bunker and no antlines arrive, they might conclude that bug bait is unreliable or doesn't work as expected and switch back to using their weapons instead.
Assault on Nova Prospect. With an infinitely responding antlion army on a coastline assaulting a fortified Combine base, it was hard not to try a Normandy-inspired level. Our initial prototype featured trenches leading up to Nova Prospect, with lethal machine guns forcing the player and their antlions to stay within the trenches to survive. It was thrilling to have machine gun fire and leaping antlions constantly passing above the trenches. Unfortunately, we couldn't make it work within our performance budget, and ultimately had to set it aside in favor of a completely different layout. However, the mounted guns remained, as their lethality proved useful in encouraging players to rely on their antlions.
I did not think I would get shredded there. What is this? What's the use of this? Oh. Bro, chill. Yeah, that part was weird.
Alert. Contact Status 0 with landing intercept. Possible acquisition 1 reinfection. All Nova process stabilization delegated to hard point. Nova prospect stabilization force directed to engage reserve. Contain exigent incursion.
Here's my army. I don't know, even though the Combine is most likely the most intelligent race in the whole universe, they still get owned by scientists. Why is this guy... Okay. Could have killed him easily. How did one die?
Nova Prospect Yard. The combat throughout the Nova Prospect Yard was largely inspired by our early observations of antlions fighting Combine soldiers. The antlions' high mobility and melee attacks paired well with the soldiers' range lethality and vulnerability up close. Antlions look great under fire, with particle effects flying everywhere, and when they finally reach a soldier, the resulting ragdoll effect is incredibly satisfying.
What? How are they alive? No one was there before. Oh. Save that. I should not have saved here. Saves. I'll save here. They blow up the
Magic Wall. Like many of our combat arenas, we needed a gate of some kind to prevent players from moving on before they finished this fight. Unfortunately, we were out of time and had to move on to the train station, so we ended up with this bit of magical bullshit. A wall that just explodes after the second gunship is defeated, revealing the way forward. We reassured ourselves that most players wouldn't notice, as they'd be busy fighting the gunships, and our playtesting had shown that generally they all finished the fight before they reached this point. With enough explosions throughout the arena, the destroyed, burning wall felt pretty natural, so we threw in a couple of simple gas puzzles on the other side to justify it. But no, we're not exactly proud of it.
The player has just completed 2 combat-heavy levels, so we wanted to slow things down once they got inside. These early levels were designed as a pacing change, allowing players to explore the layout of Nova Prospect's interiors. Along the way, we began to introduce the turret gameplay, first as an enemy to the player, and later as a tool they could use. Much of this level was built by reusing prototypes and art spaces created earlier in the project, when we were focused on shaping the look of Nova Prospect.
Turrets. Turrets were a useful design tool when the player had bug bait, as they could completely prevent antlions from approaching them head-on. This allowed us to create setups where the player couldn't just throw bug bait to proceed. They needed to circle around and clear the turrets so their antlions could follow. It didn't hurt that watching antlions get mowed down by turret fire was a great visual too.
Nova Prospect process. Like Ravenholm, Nova Prospect was initially designed with significantly different gameplay than what ultimately shipped. The first version focused on player versus combine soldier combat, with no involvement of antlions. Unlike other areas of the game where gameplay and art evolved together, Nova Prospect received a large art push early on.
Yeah.
This produced a set of reusable, polished sections of level geometry with art already applied. Assembling Nova Prospect from these pieces worked well, as the prison's layout was naturally repetitive. And then later, when we returned with antlions and bug bait, we had to repurpose the geometry to fit the new gameplay.
Okay, man. Oh, this is the boss fight.
Attention, Nova Prospect Internal
How much is left?
Containment Team. Deserve all political conscripts in Block A7. Prohibit external contact.
I think I should end it here. Almost 2.5 hours. I think I should end it. See. Yeah, not much of the game is left, but I have some stuff to do right now. Maybe I'll stream later today or sure. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you. Thanks. Bye bye. Have a nice day.